With Spider-Man Brand New Day releasing in theaters this past weekend, we now have 38 total MCU films. And so now it's time for me to stop and rank all 38 MCU films from the worst to the best. Now, going into this, I have not seen all of the TV shows that the MCU has put out over the last 5, 6 years. So I'm not including any of those in this list. I'm just ranking the 38 main films in the MCU. Now, if you have seen any of the TV shows or all the TV shows, be sure to include them in your list and your ranking down below in the comments section. While I'm talking, go down and comment down below your ranking of all the MCU films, all the TV shows you've seen, or however many of the movies and TV shows you've seen. Rank them down below in the comment section while I'm talking. For me, jumping right into this, coming in last place at number 38 pretty easily is Thor: Love and Thunder. Now, this movie is the one MCU film that I genuinely hate the most. Going into this film, I thought it should be pretty easy for Taika Waititi coming back after doing Thor Ragnarok, which was truly the high point of the main Thor franchise, and the best version of Thor as a character we've gotten, as well as Loki and many other characters that we eventually saw in Infinity War and Endgame, and that's like really the best versions we saw of those characters. So Thor: Love and Thunder, I thought, I love Taika Waititi as a director. I love his comedy for the most part. I've loved majority of the films he did before, mainly Jojo Rabbit, Thor Ragnarok. And so for him coming back directing this film, I thought should be a pretty easy slam dunk for the MCU. And then I heard that, of course, Christian Bale was coming in to play the villain, Gore the God Butcher. I was like, that's awesome. I can't wait to see what he does and how good his performance is going to be as the villain in the film. Then I go and see the film with my partner, and the entire time it grated on my nerves the entire time with the sense of comedy, sense of humor that Taika Waititi decided to inject throughout the entirety of this film, from, of course, the screaming goats, which we all vehemently make fun of and really dislike, but even more so was the extreme tonal whiplash for me in this film, where Taika Waititi decided to make this film extremely comedy-heavy, comedy-driven, with a very extreme sense of humor, while also trying to tell a serious story with having Gore the God Butcher being the villain. And then also, and this was where it was the worst for me, was in this one sequence where Thor is talking with Jane, and they're having a serious conversation and they love each other. They're back to loving each other, being reintroduced to each other. And Jane's telling him that she has cancer. And then immediately it's undercut with just a really stupid joke. I don't even remember what the joke was, but I remember it was utterly stupid. And immediately I'm sitting in the theater, I'm like, are you serious? Like, I was baffled. Like, I was literally kind of screaming in the theater at certain points because of how irritating and just terrible the awareness of the filmmaking was and the decisions made were throughout the film. So yeah, Thor: Love and Thunder was just such an epic misfire that it easily, for me, is my least favorite and also most hated MCU film. Coming in at number 37 for me is The Marvels. And The Marvels, for me, is just a very mediocre sequel to Captain Marvel. It's fun to see Miss Marvel get being put in here, meeting her idol, Captain Marvel. And of course, she is a very fun character being introduced to us in her TV show. And then we also have Monica from the show WandaVision coming in as the other Captain Marvel character that she gains powers as well. And the film does a whole like weird comedic three-way power switcheroo between the characters and them having to work together to fight this villain. And this is where the film really has its problems, is the villain's motivation and scheme is truly the dumbest we've seen in the MCU, where she fully believes that she can go to a bunch of different planets and suck out all of the air, water, um, all of that, all of those natural elements to help uh, fix her planet, bring her planet back to life. And I don't even like, I probably just needed to get through half of what I just said for you to just stop immediately and be like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And yeah, it generally makes no sense on any point of any kind of logical idea level. That, like, none of that makes sense whatsoever. So immediately that just brings the film down so much. And then just the general vibe and comedy and everything throughout the film just feels so like okay and fine otherwise. So it's really kind of it is kind of bad where that the like kind of standout most fun part of your film is a character that we were introduced to just like not all that long ago from the point of when the Marvels came out. So yeah, overall the Marvels was a very mediocre, not good continuation to Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel, we'll be talking about Captain Marvel as a film, not very soon on this list. Coming in at number 36 for me is Captain America Brave New World. Now, this is a film that was the first time we got to see Sam as Captain America in his own Captain America film. And of course, we saw him with Bucky, the Winter Soldier, in their TV show a couple years prior in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, even though Sam is now Captain America. It was very odd. It was a very odd show. And this film was, while the trailers initially were showing that it was going back to kind of the tone and vibe potentially of like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, where it was going to try and be a political thriller type of film, which of course the Winter Soldier is one of the best MCU films overall, and we'll be talking about that a good bit later, and it's way higher on my list, of course. But this film, even before released, was just doomed because it had so much background issues of the film being reworked, rewritten, and re-edited and everything. So by the time this film came out, it was really kind of a shell of itself, where it was very cool to see Harrison Ford become Red Hulk as you get towards the end of the film, and Sam as Captain America battling him. But the rest of the film just feels very, again, mediocre and just half cooked, half realized, because, I mean, yeah, it was completely reworked and re-edited and everything, so it wasn't really the version that we should have gotten, the best version we should have gotten of this. So, yeah, and then Giancarlo Esposito's character was marketed a lot in the trailer and the promotions for the film, but his character ended up not really being too much of being seen in the film whatsoever, not much screen time. So even that was kind of just completely forgotten about in the end. So yeah, Brave New World was a very lackluster continuation to, for me, as like the best or second best trilogy of the MCU, of the Captain America trilogy that we had. So yeah, this was a disappointing continuation, very much a disappointing continuation to that of that franchise. So yeah, Captain America Brave New World comes in at 36. Coming in at 35 for me is Eternals. This was the first MCU film that I went to go see, came out of, and was like, yeah, I did not fully enjoy that. Now, it's a film that I very much respect more than I enjoy. The film is very long. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes. But it's a film where we get introduced to the Eternals as characters while they're also having to band back together and become a team again to eventually fight the villain and towards the end of the film. But this film is so long and so kind of odd in its storytelling that it just feels very all over the place and like kind of circling. It really did feel like it was circling, especially in the beginning half of the film, because we had to keep going and being introduced to each character over and over again before they ended up coming together and becoming a team again to then finally go and defeat the villain of the film. So yeah, Eternals was for me an overlong slog that was very gorgeous to look at. It had a lot of great visuals, but the story and way the story was told and everything was just a mess. Coming in for me at 34 now is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Mania. And boy, this film was the promise of really introducing Kang the Conqueror, our new big bad of the MCU, for what was going to be our next Avengers level threat. And man, did this film disappoint in that for sure. I mean, the Ant-Man and the Wasp, like Paul Rudd and the main cast for the Ant-Man films are all charming as ever, and I love Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, Ant-Man, so much. But yeah, this film was just wrong. It was just utterly the wrong time to fully introduce Kang the Conqueror as our next big bad, next Avengers level threat, because the story ends with Ant-Man, Scott Lang, and Cassie and Hank and Hope and even Hank and Hope's mom, wife, them all being able to easily defeat Kang with a bunch of army of ants and all of them teaming together and everything to defeat him. So it was like, well, okay, if Ant-Man and all of his friends are able to, and the literal ants that they have powers over are able to defeat Kang, then why the hell would we believe that he's our next big threat, big Avengers level threat? So yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania just was an utter disappointment of a film overall, especially as a multiverse film, and especially as our true introduction to Kang. And of course, eventually we end up switching to Doctor Doom as our next Avengers threat, Avengers villain, which of course we're getting Avengers Doomsday as our next MCU film coming out at the end of this year, which I mean, I'm very excited for, but we'll see how good that ends up being. Anywho, moving on, number 33, I have Captain Marvel. The first Captain Marvel came out just before Avengers Endgame, so it was coming out literally at the peak of the MCU, just before we get to the true conclusion to the story building of the past 10 years for Endgame and that epic finale. But Captain Marvel is a film in and of itself. Was a very strange film because we get introduced to Captain Marvel, who is basically the most overpowered MCU character, or MCU hero, with the powers that she has. And the film plays out where she has amnesia, so she doesn't even fully realize who she is and how powerful she is, while us, the audience, already kind of do realize how powerful she is. And then it was cool to see Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury de-aged and see that version of Nick Fury. But then at the same time, it was very not cool and very unsatisfying to see the actual reason he lost his eye. that was utterly disappointing. But yeah, Captain Marvel as a character is introduced, and we're already at arm's length with her because of her amnesia, and her not really realizing how truly powerful and who she truly is. And then on top of that, she also really comes off as arrogant eventually, and that's especially the case as we see her being involved in Avengers Endgame, but we'll get to Endgame way down the line here. But yeah, Captain Marvel as a film was definitely benefited from the hype of Infinity War and Endgame and the MCU being at the height of its popularity. But yeah, as a film in and of itself, it was very meh. Coming in at number 32, I have Thor: The Dark World. Now, this was the MCU in its early days at its most mediocre, where it was still trying to figure out its stride, how to really get into what we really love about the MCU, which it very much succeeded in as we got towards Phase 3, and that entire time of like just after Ant-Man and Captain America Civil War all the way through Endgame. That time in the MCU, of course. So Thor: The Dark World, though, was, the MCU at its most mediocre back in its early days, where I could not tell you really much at all about the plot of the film. I couldn't tell you any true characteristics or anything about the villain beyond his name being Malekith, but I don't know what else I could tell you about him. It was cool to see the expansion of Thor and Loki's brotherly relationship, as well as the very much contention that they have with each other that we get to see as well continuing throughout the rest of the MCU and the time that we get with them. And then, of course, we get Thor and Jane. Really the main part of the story that I remember is Thor having to save Jane's life because of one of the Infinity Stones having made her really sick, and Thor having to make sure he saves her life by the end of the film. Beyond that, I remember nothing about this film. It was extremely forgettable. And this Thor: The Dark World was definitely the MCU at its most mediocre in its early days. Coming in at number 31 for me is Black Widow. Black Widow was the first film the MCU ended up putting out in its time away, of course, after the whole pandemic happening and theaters not being able to put out any new movies for quite a while. So this was the MCU's return to the big screen after doing Endgame and then Spider-Man: Far From Home in 2019. And Black Widow is a film that is, I think, for a lot of people, we regard it as the forgotten or the lost Phase 3 film, because this is a film where we get to know Natasha as Black Widow, of how she becomes Black Widow, her childhood, get introduced to her sister Yelena, who has become a massive fan favorite character over these past few years since we've been introduced to her. And then, of course, David Harbour played Natasha and Yelena's father, who was an absolute standout, and really the other main standout in this film as Red Guardian. But the film overall, outside of us really understanding where Natasha became Black Widow and all of that, and the family dynamics of her with her family, the film and the plot, the villain, all end up becoming, by the third act, very just typical, generic superhero blockbuster fight in the third act, and very overblown, while the rest of the film was a very grounded, and made sense to be a very grounded film for the character that the film was telling the story of. So Black Widow, it was a totally fine, very watchable film that we got a little bit more time with Natasha after, of course, her death in Endgame, which was just heartbreaking. Coming in at 30 for me is the original Thor. The first Thor film was a great introduction to how great Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston were being cast as Thor and Loki. And of course, Kenneth Branagh, the director of the film, he brought the great Shakespearean grandeur to our introduction to Asgard. So the film, when we're in that beginning part of the film, being introduced to Thor and Loki and their father and mother, and being in the world of Asgard, it looks beautiful. It's so cool. But the film really struggles tonally. And I can't lie, I feel like I'm saying this a lot with a lot of the Thor films, all but one at least. The original Thor film really does suffer from its dramatic shift in its tone, where it goes from the seriousness and grandeur of Asgard to it being a kind of fish out of water comedy when Thor goes to Earth and we get introduced to Jane and her sister and eventually Thor falling in love with Jane, and all of the comedy that comes from Chris Hemsworth as Thor, getting introduced to all this just typical human stuff on Earth. And then at the same time, the story of the film, Thor doesn't really know that there's anything bad going on or that Loki's planning anything bad until like literally the last act of the film. And he's like, all right, well, I have to go and defeat Loki. And it was kind of somewhat a retread of like the Avengers, since Loki was the villain of the Avengers. But Thor. Yeah. So overall, the original Thor was a great introduction to the star power and the charisma of Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston as Thor and Loki. But yeah, the film overall was very kind of a mediocre, fine introduction to the world of Thor. Coming in at number 29 for me is The Incredible Hulk. Now, this was the one MCU film that was put out by Universal, which made the film kind of feel for a lot of us like the black sheep of the MCU. Now, the film overall, it is utterly like very watchable, very fun, kind of darker action film where Edward Norton is very good and totally fine as Bruce Banner, the Hulk, our introduction to that character. And then, for me, of course, the standout of that film really is the third act of Hulk battling Abomination. But then overall, the rest of the film just is kind of very, like, fine, a very just fine story, like, kind of whatever type of, it was just like the rest of the film. It was really cool to see Edward Norton transform from Bruce Banner to the Hulk at certain points, and we got introduced to Thunderbolt Ross, and that's all cool. But overall the film is just very kind of meh, especially coming off of the launch of the MCU, Iron Man, and how high it was, just what a start the MCU had with that. Coming in at number 28 for me is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, I very much enjoy Shang-Chi, to be clear. I very much enjoy this film. I was shocked by how really fun and enjoyable this film was when it came out. Now, this film was directed by the same director that just put out Spider-Man Brand New Day, Destin Daniel Cretton, and I love how he portrays all of his action on screen and filming all of that. The action in this film is so cool and so fun, and we get to see a continuation of that and how fun he can make the action within the world of Spider-Man and Brand New Day. But with Shang-Chi, we get action tailored more with martial arts and all the stuff you can do with that, especially set in a superhero world. It was all really, really cool. A lot of it was done practically. Of course, there were some sequences that were done with CGI in the background, but it was really, really cool. Now, the main story was also some of the most surprisingly effective of the film, where at the core of it, it's very much a father who has completely lost his way over the grief of losing his wife and becoming a villain, and having Shang-Chi having to then battle his father eventually towards the end of the film, especially. And because of that, it makes of course, not to forget this, the villain of the film is like the true version of the Mandarin, then is the father of Shang-Chi, and this is the true, like, great version of that character, again losing his wife. And so we understand that is terrible. That is a really terrible thing to go through, and we understand then why he ends up becoming evil and becoming a villain, and then his son having to come and battle him and try to talk it out with him, but then regardless having to battle him. But then in the third act, it's kind of weird because they then somewhat abandon the great martial arts fighting of what made the rest of the film and the action of the film so cool, to just having generic CGI dragon fighting. And while that is like kind of lore, like somewhat lore of like China and that area, it just felt like, again, we're abandoning really cool new stuff that we're getting introduced to that really worked and was really effective, to just going back to the typical same old generic superhero third act stuff of just CGI battles. So yeah, Shang-Chi is a film that I very much enjoy. I love a lot of the performances in the film. I love the majority of the action in the film, but the third act definitely drags it down. Coming in at number 27 for me is Spider-Man: Far From Home. This film is so utterly frustrating for me because it is very entertaining. I love Jake Gyllenhaal's performance as Mysterio. The showcase of Mysterio's powers throughout the film, and especially when he's tormenting Peter, are some of the coolest visuals that I've seen in the MCU. And of course, Tom Holland, Zendaya, they all bring their A game, their great performances as Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and MJ. And of course, Jacob Batalon is great again as Ned, Peter's best friend. They go on and so then Peter, MJ, Ned, their whole friend group and class go on a trip to Europe. And we get introduced to Mysterio. Nick Fury is involved. And the issue with the film is twofold. One, and mainly, is, again, the villain's, Mysterio's objective and plan is so fundamentally flawed and stupid. Because why would it make any sense for him to use his powers to create these fake natural element monsters to battle, to show that he could potentially be the next great Avenger to help avenge the Earth and keep humanity safe, when it's all fake? It's all like being a fake superhero. So when a true actual threat comes, I mean, he's just going to be made into an absolute fool. So there's that. And then number two is Tony Stark left who's now dead after the events of Endgame, because Far From Home now is set after Endgame. Tony Stark is dead. He leaves his military-grade glasses to Peter Parker, who was dead in the blip, technically dead for 5 years before Tony and the Avengers brought him back in Endgame before the final battle. And he leaves those glasses for Peter without any instructions whatsoever. Happy gives it to him. He's like, Peter, Tony wanted you to have these glasses because he thought that it made the most sense for you to have them. Like, what? How? How does that make any sense? So yeah, this film, while being extremely entertaining, it's all superficial. It's all very superficial in its entertainment, because at the core of the plot, of the story, of the ideas, it's all so flawed and so dumb. Coming in at 26 for me is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, this is a very, very fun, small-scale film, especially coming off of Avengers Infinity War. This was a very fun sequel, continuation to Ant-Man, getting to see them just go and try and retrieve this item, and it being a MacGuffin type story of having to go and retrieve this item where a few of other bad guys are trying to retrieve it, so got to keep it out of the bad guys' hands, right? So yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I really don't have much to say about it. It was fun once again to get to see Paul Rudd as Ant-Man, and then Evangeline Lilly, who portrays Hope, become the Wasp, and them teaming up. And then, of course, it's always fun to see Michael Pena as Ant-Man, Scott's hilarious sidekick, as one of his friends, and all like the stories he tells, some of the most funny standout bits in the early Ant-Man films. So yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp was a very small-scale, fun continuation to the original Ant-Man, a very fun, small, enjoyable time, especially coming off the heaviness of Infinity War. Coming in at number 25 is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This film is kind of complicated to kind of rank and talk about, because it is a very good film, especially with the hand that they ended up being dealt. Of course, particularly because Chadwick Boseman's untimely, just devastatingly sad death just before the film really wrapped filming and ended up coming out and everything, and they had to just really course correct a ton for this film. So it became a very melancholy, sad film that ended up paying tribute to T'Challa, played by Chadwick Boseman, but also ended up really feeling like a tribute to Chadwick Boseman as a person, as an actor at the same time. So it's a great film for that purpose, but at the same time, you're also kind of left wondering who's going to be the next Black Panther. And the story in and of itself is kind of interesting, seeing his sister end up talking to and trying to form a relationship and try to get the I don't even remember his name. Trying to get him and his world, his people, to maybe work with Wakanda and join forces, but that doesn't work out, of course, because he ends up being the villain of the film. And Shuri has to go and has to defeat him and keep Wakanda safe. But Black Panther: Wakanda Forever comes in at 25. This is the highest I feel like I could put it, due to the nature of the film and the fact that it's also just because of how heavy it is. And some of it, I mean, of course, most of it really isn't in the fault isn't its fault. But because of how heavy the film is, it kind of gets held back a bit due to all of that. So Black Panther: Wakanda Forever comes in at 25 for me. Coming in at 24 for me is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I went to go see this film with a bunch of my friends. We all had an absolute blast with this film. We were like, all right, we're like, this is the first, we're going into the multiverse in the MCU using Doctor Strange and his magic and everything. And while we had an absolute blast with the film, and of course a standout being the whole Illuminati sequence and kind of being getting to see some of the original X-Men and stuff, being back in being seen in the MCU in this film. And of course we got to talk about Wanda officially becoming Scarlet Witch and getting to see the absolute Sam Raimi Evil Dead horror that comes with bringing the true Scarlet Witch to life and all of how horrific her presence is at certain points of the film. It really got me to jump a few times in the film where she ends up killing some of the people, especially during the Illuminati sequence where she comes in and just mows down them all in 5 minutes. It was so entertaining, but so horrific at certain points. Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness was a very, very entertaining, fun time. But at the same time, you really didn't get much multiverse fun, and especially not nearly as much multiverse fun as we could have gotten for a film called Multiverse of Madness. So this was a very fun continuation to the original Doctor Strange, but at the same time, especially if you think about the end credits scene of the original Doctor Strange, you're like, what are we gonna do kind of with that? Where I thought we were in the at least for me, I thought the sequel to Doctor Strange would be really building off of that credit scene and seeing what that would end up being played out as. But this was a very fun sequel to Doctor Strange regardless, and very fun to see Sam Raimi tap back into his horror roots, and where we all originally knew and grew to love him from. For me, all right, coming in 23 now is Iron Man 2. Easily, for me, the messiest and weakest, in my opinion, of the Iron Man trilogy. It's, especially coming off of how great the original Iron Man was, this film just had way too much going on. Tony doesn't realize a villain's coming after him and what's going on with the villain until over halfway through the film. We get set up for with we get to see Black Widow for the first time in this film to set up for the Avengers. But yeah, Iron Man 2 was a very, very messy sequel to the original Iron Man. And now, of course, it is documented that this is due to the fact that Jon Favreau, the director of the first two Iron Man films, he asked for 3 years to really work on the script, get it to a place where he really liked it and where he could really make the sequel to Iron Man that would be truly a great continuation to the first film. But the studio and everything only gave him 2 years to write the film and make it and put it out. So it was a very quick turnaround. And you can feel that once the film came out and we all got to see it. It just had way too much going on and really did feel like it needed a bit more time to be ironed out at certain points and really get the true main plots, at least main plots and maybe one or two subplots that they truly wanted to hone in on and focus on to be really ironed out and focused on for that film. So yeah, overall Iron Man 2, it's still like, it's great. Robert Downey Jr. is always great as Tony Stark, Iron Man. But yeah, Iron Man 2 is very, very bogged down in subplots, a very messy story. The villain isn't all that interesting or memorable outside of like one sequence where he like first attacks Tony. So yeah, Iron Man 2, definitely for me, the weakest of the Iron Man trilogy. Coming in at number 22 is Thunderbolts, or The New Avengers. I really enjoyed this film when it came out, went to go see it, and I didn't really know what to think about it entirely going in. Watching the trailers, I was like, okay, so we're like kind of doing a different version of kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, but more grounded on Earth type of thing. But then I went to go see the movie, and not only was the film about mental health and really finding yourself and accepting who you are and everything, and that really spoke to me at the time I saw this film, because I had just been going through a lot of kind of negative mental health stuff for me personally for several months at that time. And so seeing this film, it was really refreshing and nice to see an MCU film tackle that subject and really do it really well. Of course, we end up getting the reveal that the Thunderbolts are our new Avengers, and it's a very interesting mix of characters for sure. Of course, you get Yelena, who was already a fan favorite from Black Widow, and we get to see even more of her, and she is absolute blast to watch in this film. You get the Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp as part of the team, which was very interesting. Of course, you get Red Guardian as well as part of the team. David Harbour was so fun to see again in that role. You get Bucky, you get that new Captain America from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who he's not like, he was like the evil, really bad version of Captain America that we all hated in the show, but he is like an absolute kind of ass version of Captain America. And then the villain of the film, whose name was just oh my god, what was it? It was Bob. His name was Bob. And from the trailers and everything, I thought it was hilarious that like he was just introduced as just this like random normal guy just named Bob, and then you get to watch the movie and he ends up becoming the villain, and one of the most kind of really creepy villains for me in the MCU, with the way they showed him really fully turning evil and just the full darkness he fully becomes. And then the powers that he has and uses on just some of the general public in the city was truly terrifying. To like, when that first happened, I was like, oh my god, like Jesus, they just became like a shadow, like just gone. Like it was kind of terrifying for me to see that. It was really, really creepy, but really effective too. So yeah, Bob ended up becoming like one of the shocking and most surprisingly great villains of some of the more recent MCU films, where the MCU has really started to feel like it's gotten back on track to really how great they used to be during the Infinity Saga. So yeah, the Thunderbolts, New Avengers, that film was such a pleasant surprise, such a fun film for me to watch. And I can't wait to see how they interact with all the rest of the some of the original Avengers and the X-Men and everything come Avengers Doomsday and then eventually Secret Wars, and see how those films really play out. I really hope those films work. Gosh, I really do. Coming in at 21, I have Deadpool and Wolverine, and my God, was this entertainingly fun and hilarious. I went to go see this film opening night with my best friend, and we were in a packed theater, and the entire time, the theater was just laughing their asses off the entire time. My friend and I were laughing hysterically from beginning to end. It was just so fun to see Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool finally share the screen with Hugh Jackman as the Wolverine. This film also tied in some of the stuff from the Loki TV show with the TVA, and then we get introduced to Cassandra Nova, the villain, who was the brother to Charles Xavier, which was a really fun just kind of twist with that. And all the powers that she had were really creepy, but so funny at the same time. All of the references and the stuff Deadpool makes fun of for the MCU and Marvel in general now, especially, and immediately in the film, he makes fun of the Disney-Fox merger and why it took so long for him to return. It was just so funny. I had such a great time with this. In fact, when the movie ended, after we watched it the first time, I turned to my friend right as we were getting off our seats to leave, and I was like, my face is hurting because of how much I was laughing and smiling throughout the entirety of the film. And I heard like another guy a little bit down the aisle from me, and he was like, yeah, I feel that. Yeah. So it was so funny. I love Deadpool and Wolverine so much, and I really hope we get to see I hope we get to see Deadpool, and honestly, by extension, Wolverine, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in at least one of the two next Avengers films. So, God, hopefully, yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine, I absolutely love. All right, now we're getting to number 20. Now we're getting towards our top 20 MCU films, and coming in at number 20. I have Fantastic Four First Steps. Fantastic Four First Steps for me was, going in, I was like, okay, can the MCU finally give us a truly great, definitive Fantastic Four film that isn't just like a cheesy, fun product of its time, very entertaining, but definitely a product of its time, 2000s version that we had with like, Chris Evans and Jessica Alba, those films back in the 2000s, and definitely try to be way better than Four Stick that we got in 2015. That was just an absolute abomination of a Fantastic Four film. So the bar was generally set very low for the MCU to actually give us a definitive, great Fantastic Four film. And I was so glad that when I went to go see this film, they absolutely gave us the definitive best Fantastic Four film, without question. The entire cast, whether it was Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, the rest of the cast that played the rest of the Fantastic Four, Galactus was so cool and so fun of a villain, so terrifying of a villain. I was never more terrified for a baby in any film that I've watched than I was watching this film for the baby of Sue and Mr. Fantastic. The entire film, once we got to that point where we knew Galactus's plan and why he truly was the villain of the film, I was like, please, for the love of God, keep that baby safe. But yeah, overall, like, this film was such a great MCU film, Fantastic Four film. It had such a great specific style set in a futuristic 1960s world that was absolutely fascinating to see. All the talk of like the space and all of that was just so interesting. I I loved the fact that also this film ended up being a story about family and sticking together and banding together with each other to keep each other safe. It was a profoundly great film that I mean, it was a film where I was like, how did it take this long for us to get a truly great Fantastic Four film? Like, the MCU truly does make it look so easy to make like the definitive versions of so many of these like classic Marvel characters, Marvel team comic book characters. So yeah, Fantastic Four: First Steps was such a great film that like I truly love. Coming in at number 19 for me is Iron Man 3. Now, a lot of people are going to think this is ridiculous. For me, I mean, of course, the Mandarin twist at the end is super weird and not great at all. But overall, I think it very much did, to somewhat of a satisfying degree, wrap up the Iron Man trilogy very well. I think the director, Shane Black, his style of writing and comedy and quips really fits with the way Robert Downey Jr. portrays Tony Stark and Iron Man as the character. So that already was fantastic and just really fun to watch throughout that film. And then at the same time, it's also all about Tony abandoning being Iron Man entirely, blowing up all his suits, but then also helping this kid along the way at the same time as part of his character arc throughout the film. So it's a very odd film with the mix of ideas put in, of course, especially because we still get to be with Tony for multiple films after this. But Iron Man 3, I still find a lot of enjoyment out of, minus of course, that Mandarin twist in the third act to end the film. But yeah, Iron Man 3, I still get a lot of fun with. A lot of fun out of. Coming in at number 18 for me is Spider-Man Homecoming. This was the first Tom Holland standalone Spider-Man film we got in the MCU, coming off of our introduction to him as that character in Captain America Civil War about a year prior. And this was such a fun, like lighthearted, high school centric introduction to his version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, where we truly get to see Peter Parker as an actual high school kid, because Tom Holland at the time was actually a teenager. So it truly was believable that he was a teenager being in high school, and then at the same time balancing his life as a teenager, being a high schooler, having all of his friends, and starting to try and fall in love with being Spider-Man and keeping that secret and trying to figure that out. Now, at the same time as well, we got Michael Keaton as the Vulture, who ended up being one of the most shocking best MCU films during the MCU at its peak, during phase 3, during the time where we all absolutely had to just go see every MCU film because each film was like such an event. And him as the Vulture was one of the most refreshing and most interesting villains for any MCU film at that time, because he, as a character, he's just a normal guy working a construction job, just trying to get by to raise his family. He gets wronged by the government, by the system, and he ends up going into illegal alien tech trading and becomes a villain because of that. And then Peter Parker, Spider-Man, ends up coming across him and having to defeat him. But then the ultimate twist, and what really made it truly shocking and really interesting for that character of Vulture and the relationship towards Peter and Spider-Man, was that Michael Keaton's character, he was the father to the girl Peter was in love with and asked out to go to the homecoming dance. So that was like one of the most shocking twists and reveals in any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films in general, but especially at that time. And then, of course, you get Tony Stark being the mentor, continuing to be the mentor to Peter and helping him out at certain times throughout the film, trying to make sure he stays on top of being, trying to just be a high schooler and just normal kid. But of course, Peter is Spider-Man, and he also has to be Spider-Man and keep the people of New York safe, be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But of course, he and Tony don't see eye to eye at certain points of the film, and it was just a really fun, hilarious dynamic to watch them and get really introduced to Happy Hogan yet again, and like his even more of a role that he plays into his relationship with Tony, and now also his relationship to keeping Peter safe and also being a guide for Peter. So that was really fun. And yeah, so Spider-Man Homecoming was just a great introduction to Peter Parker and Tom Holland's version of that character in Spider-Man. Coming in at number 17 for me is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This film gets a lot of back and forth conjecture all across online and throughout many MCU fans. For me, I love the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy so much. It is my favorite MCU trilogy. And I mean, Volume 2, for me, it is definitely the weakest of the three Guardians films, but I still have an absolute blast with this film. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the story is where definitely it is the most faulty and where it does definitely fall short of the other two films, because while it is telling a story of Peter Quill, Star-Lord, finding his dad again and getting that relationship back with his dad, trying to form that relationship again with his dad, it's also then revealed that his dad is a truly horrifically gross villain by the end of the film. But at the same time, the way the story plays out, we don't really get to know that until like halfway through the film. And then it's also a film where the Guardians as a team, as they're visiting Ego on his planet and Peter reconnecting with him, they don't know that Ego's actually the villain until over halfway through. And then the first half of the film also is like the Sovereign are the villains of the film, and you think they're the villains of the film. So it's kind of odd. And then you get Yondu and then his crew kind of turning on him, and you thinking like they're also the villain. So it's very structured very weirdly, where it feels like there is like multiple different villains throughout the film, story wise, and even just structurally act wise throughout the film. Now, of course, you always have to talk about the soundtrack. I will say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2's soundtrack is very close in contention with the original Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack is my favorite soundtrack of the whole trilogy. I absolutely love all of the music played throughout the film. I'm a huge just 70s and 80s, particularly 70s and 80s music fan. So the first two Guardians films just plays so much music that I absolutely love. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 soundtrack is absolutely no exception to that. So many songs I absolutely love and going back and repeat listening to this day. And then also this film for me features, this will come across as, I very much acknowledge this probably will come across as somewhat controversial or very controversial to some of you guys, but it does feature the saddest death for me, character-wise, in the entire MCU. Minus one, but still. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, of course, has the death of Yondu at the end of the film. And my God, when I tell you, when I saw this film and was watching it for the first time, and Yondu sacrificed himself for Peter to keep him alive, keep him safe, and Yondu died, and the whole the whole like burial, funeral sequence at the end to end the film. I was just so sad. I was crying. And then you get to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and just the small, like, not even 5-second cameo Yondu has in Guardians 3. I was once again crying seeing him again because I love Yondu as a character so much, and truly, he is the actual good father figure for Peter, as we and especially end up seeing in this film, but even going back to the first film. So yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 just packed so much entertainment, emotions, and just overall was such a fun film for me that, I mean, even though it is the weakest of the Guardians films for me, I can't have this being ranked any lower than 17. Coming in at number 16 for me is Black Panther. This film was coming out just before Infinity War, and really was the film that put Ryan Coogler as a director like truly on the map, as yes, he is very much one of the new standout leading directors of our time. Of course, he'd come off of doing the Rocky spin-off franchise Creed, but Black Panther was really where we all truly saw how great of a director he is. And the story being told here is really just super layered and very, very interesting. We get introduced fully to Wakanda and T'Challa and that whole tribe, all the characters within it, and some of the other tribes that T'Challa and the Wakandans know and are friends with. And then you get introduced to Michael B. Jordan's character, who's the villain of the film, but he is also morally right in what he believes and what he is going to Wakanda to try and get them to understand. And then in the battle between him and T'Challa, where he ends up defeating T'Challa and becoming the new king of Asgard. Not Asgard, Wakanda, Lord. I'm all over the place here. God, Lord. Sorry. The king of Wakanda. He ends up becoming the king of Wakanda. At that time, as an audience member, we're all like, oh my God, this is terrible. What is happening? But at the same time, we end up getting and learning throughout the rest of the film that, yes, like, the way he's going about it is technically wrong and villainous, but at the same time, morally and point-wise, he brings a lot of truth to Wakanda, and Wakanda it's like having to be and becoming more a part of the rest of the world and sharing its resources and truly becoming just not a enclosed country and place, but becoming more a part of the world, and then by extension eventually the rest of the MCU. So yeah, Black Panther as a film was one of the most thematically rich and truly the most thematically interesting, rich film of the MCU we've gotten. Black Panther's such a great it's kind of interesting to think about, like, Black Panther being such a great film in the final film in the lead up to Infinity War, and then you get to the final film in the lead up to Endgame being Captain Marvel, and that being such a just kind of mediocre film, actually, even though it made so much money. But yeah, Black Panther, it truly is a great, great film. Coming in at number 15 for me is Avengers Age of Ultron. This is the first MCU film that I actually saw ever in the theater. So this was my introduction. This was, oddly enough, my introduction to the MCU. I went to go see this in theaters back in when it came out. I went Memorial Day weekend of 2015. I was in Kansas City. I went with my mom, my godmother, and some of my godmother's kids. We all went to the theater to see this movie. And for me, this is the film that I hold closest to my heart because it was the film that introduced me to the MCU. And I also genuinely love Ultron as a villain. It's a film I always love to go back to rewatching anytime I get the chance to. Avengers Age of Ultron, it's a film, it's a sequel to the Avengers, and everything in it is bigger and bolder, and there's a lot more going on. Now, a lot of people say and consider this to be the most confusing Marvel Cinematic Universe film, and I don't really agree with that, though I guess I can see it. Because I don't really agree with that, because I'm like, well, on a story level, I very much can easily follow what's going on. Now, of course, there is a lot of setup for, especially in eventually Avengers Infinity War and then Endgame, but there's also setup for a bunch of other films like Black Panther, because we get our first mention of Wakanda in the film, and some other films as well. But at the same time, Age of Ultron, I truly love watching anytime I get the chance to. Ultron as a villain is so interesting. I love James Spader's performance as Ultron, as being both, because Ultron is a mix of Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and then as well, saying Vision, but it's not Vision. It's oh my goodness. Yeah, it was a mix of so many different, like, it was the original like high-tech voice system that Tony used, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of it. I should not be forgetting the name of it. But Ultron was just this complex mix of a bunch of different elements, and he ended up, in Tony's view, instead of becoming the armor around the world that he envisioned to particularly protect the Earth from Thanos and the events of Infinity War, it ended up backfiring horribly, and Ultron ended up seeing all the bad of humanity and thinking, oh, I need to fully eradicate humanity, and making the world all metal, all robots. And so the Avengers have to team up again and go and defeat Ultron and take him down. We also get introduced to Wanda and Quicksilver. Of course, I guess for me, my biggest criticism of this film is the way they treat Quicksilver in this film and just kill him off during the final battle of the film. And because, I can't believe, and a lot of us can't believe how much they wasted that character and the potential of that character. But other than that, for me, I really do truly love and absolutely love going back and rewatching Avengers Age of Ultron. I think it is very much a worthy and really good sequel to the first Avengers film. And of course, I do admit that I, like a lot of people, do rank it as the weakest Avengers film. I really do enjoy it and love it much more than most people do. Coming in at number 14 for me is the original Ant-Man. This was such a fun introduction to Ant-Man and Scott Lang as a character, but also story-wise, it's just fun to have it be a small-scale, just heist story. And at the same time, we get introduced to the fun side characters of Luis, played by Michael Pena, and the rest of Scott's gang and friends. You get introduced to Michael Douglas as Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, and then also Evangeline Lilly as Hope, who isn't the Wasp yet, but by the end of the film is teased to then become the Wasp in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And this film also, I will say visually wise, has some of the most interesting visuals, because you're playing around with the different sizes of Ant-Man shrinking, and the fight when especially towards the end of the film, the fight between Ant-Man and the not the Wasp, the Hornet, I think the Hornet, right? Or the Yellow Jacket, between Ant-Man and the Yellow Jacket, them fighting in Scott's daughter's room on the Thomas the Tank Engine table, and that was just so fun, just the playing with different sizes, different heights, and everything. That It's one of the most fun visual styled films, while also at its core, story wise, just being a very simple heist film. So yeah, and the original Ant-Man is still one of the just most pleasant, fun gems of the MCU during its rise to its peak. Coming in at number 13 for me is the original Doctor Strange. Again, visually, this is probably the most visually interesting film in the MCU, using magic as well as kind of the visual style of Christopher Nolan's Inception, as well as Escher drawings, all mixed together to create such a fascinating film to look at for a lot of the film. Especially once Dr. Stephen Strange gets his powers, and is trained to become a sorcerer. And then I will say, like, the villain of the film is very forgettable, even though it's played by Mads Mikkelsen, who is a great actor. It's just unfortunate that the role and the villain that he was given to play just did not really have much interesting stuff going on with him. But other than that, the first Doctor Strange film is just really pleasant surprise of a very fun, visually styled film, particularly. Coming in now at number 12 for me is Thor Ragnarok, the one truly great main Thor film. Taika Waititi came in and just injected this franchise with the right amount of energy and comedy that it needed. It's by far the funniest Thor film, definitely the best Thor film. Chris Hemsworth is, I would say, at his peak comedic-wise, playing the character of Thor. Loki is some of the most fun. We get to see Tom Hiddleston as Loki in this film. Getting to see as well Bruce Banner and the Hulk be in the film and interact with Thor and Loki was really fun, and that was also a really fun version of Bruce and the Hulk to get to see. I loved seeing Jeff Goldblum in the film during that arena fight sequence. He was so charismatic, so fun to watch. And then you get the true villain of the film, Hela, Thor and Loki's sister, coming and trying to take over Asgard. And this, of course, by the title of the film, Ragnarok, it's known in the Nordic lore as the end of days, the apocalypse. So Hela comes and is bringing kind of the Ragnarok to Asgard, and Thor, Loki, Hulk, Valkyrie, they all have to team up and go and battle Hela to defeat her. This was the first time also where we got to see that, like, wow, Thor maybe is like meeting his match, because Hela was able to destroy Mjolnir, which was something we had never seen any other film, really, like any villain, any other film kind of try and do or like even succeed at. So that was really kind of a shocking, interesting thing to see. Yeah, Thor Ragnarok was just so fun. I will say the soundtrack of this film it's kind of irritated me over time, because it is solely and truly Guns N' Roses. And as much as I do love some of those songs from Guns N' Roses, I can't stand it all being Guns N' Roses for the soundtrack, and it be like being those just songs that we all know from Guns N' Roses throughout that film. It's just become super irritating for me over time. But otherwise, overall, Thor Ragnarok was definitely a pleasant surprise, but really great to finally get a truly great Thor film. Coming in for me now at number 11 is Captain America: The First Avenger, our introduction to Steve Rogers' Captain America. I will say, like, the first hour of the film was some of the most interesting origin story stuff that I've ever seen from a introduction to a superhero in a superhero film, where we get to see Steve Rogers is like, originally we get to see him as this very short but like very just all-American, good-natured guy, helping out in World War II, his relationship and very close best friend friendship with Bucky. And then, of course, we get the introduction to his relationship and love of Peggy. But then he gets the serum, becomes the first super soldier, becomes Captain America, and has to then eventually go into the ice and sacrifice himself, and just emotionally just wrecking him having to tell Peggy that he's just gonna have to have a rain check on that date, going into the ice and being frozen for 70 years, waking up in a completely different world, in the now modern world, in the actual world of the MCU, where it's the Avengers are now a thing, and Nick Fury comes to recruit him to become an Avenger, as the title suggests, the first Avenger. And yeah, Captain America, the First Avenger, it's a film that it's a great introduction to the character. But at the same time, it's also, I will say it is the weakest of the trilogy of the Steve Rogers Captain America films, while still being great. Coming in now for me at number 10 is Spider-Man No Way Home. This is a film that was an absolute treat, an absolute just like, as a Spider-Man fan, whoever is a Spider-Man fan, just yes, we finally got this film of getting all three generations of Spider-Man coming together and then battling a bunch of the classic Spider-Man villains from the other iterations of Spider-Man, of Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, all in one film. Now, I put it at 10 because while it is a great Spider-Man fan experience and Spider-Man event film, it's on an actual movie film standpoint, the setup is just so frustratingly dumb and lame. The setup is Peter Parker is unhappy that him and Ned and MJ don't get into the college of their choice. So he goes and meets Doctor Strange after seeing a wizard or witch decoration, and then goes to Doctor Strange to ask if he can cast a spell to help get him and his friends into college. He go back in time to do that, but of course they don't have the time stone anymore. So Doctor Strange is like, well, we can do a spell where everyone forgets that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and of course the events of the end of Far From Home, Mysterio revealing Spider-Man's identity as Peter Parker. Like, we could do that. So they go down to cast a spell, but they don't at any point stop and actually talk about the ramifications for the spell, what to actually cast for the spell. There's no talk whatsoever of hold on, let's make it clear what we're casting here for this spell. So Peter ends up interrupting Doctor Strange as he's casting the spell 5-6 different times. And then, of course, because of that, then the multiverse breaks and we get Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, Sandman, Electro, the Lizard, all coming into their world, as well as eventually we get the awesome surprises of seeing Tobey and Andrew as their Spider-Man coming in. And, of course, then helping Peter, Tom Holland's Peter, to go and get and capture all these villains to help bring them back to their rightful universes, but also at the same time helping try and save them from their powers and not having to end up being killed by Spider-Man in their respective universes. Now, at the same time, story-wise, like, as much as that setup is so frustrating, the moment the film gets to the apartment scene and everything after, it's all A plus storytelling. They just knew what they wanted to pull off and just gift to the fans the rest of the film. The final battle was awesome. This is my favorite performance Willem Dafoe has given as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. It, like, even though him as Green Goblin in the original Spider-Man was so good, and that foundation was just such a great performance already, I feel like him coming back in his performance here in No Way Home, it was just even better. It was like he just stepped right back into the role and just made the role and made that character even more terrifying and iconic. So yeah, Spider-Man No Way Home, as much as the setup, again, was just so lame, so lackluster, the actual Spider-Man event of it all was just so satisfying and so awesome. Coming in at number 9 is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This is how you do a political thriller set in the MCU right. This is, I mean, by many people regarded as one of, if not the best MCU films. I do not share that sentiment at all, but I definitely agree that it's one of the best MCU films, one of the top 10 best MCU films. Captain America, the Winter Soldier, this is where we get Steve and Bucky's reunion, and Steve realizing that the Winter Soldier, in fact, is his old best friend, Bucky Barnes. And he has to do everything in his power to keep the government from ending up capturing Bucky and killing him, and all of the political tension that comes with that. Of course, you get the villain of the film. I completely am blanking on the actor's name, but he just recently died, which was so sad, just like a few years ago. But he was so good in the villain, as a villain in the film. Captain America, the Winter Soldier was such a great political thriller, and also just Captain America's sequel film to continue his arc, and getting to see him getting introduced to the Falcon, getting introduced to him and their friendship dynamic, and then Black Widow, Natasha, also being in the film and helping out throughout the film. It was very, very cool to see a Captain America film where you also used one of the members of the Avengers, but then also introduced the Falcon, Sam Wilson, the Falcon, as what would be a future member of the Avengers, and that Anthony Mackie's great performance as Sam Wilson, the Falcon, and his great friendship relationship with Steve Rogers, and then, of course, Natasha. So, yeah, Captain America, the Winter Soldier is just such a great political thriller, and how you do a political thriller in the MCU the right way. Coming in at number 8 for me is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. An absolutely gut-wrenchingly sad, but so satisfying conclusion to the Guardians trilogy, where we get Rocket's true backstory. The High Evolutionary is just one of the most diabolically evil, just you want to see him taken down so badly, type of villains we've gotten in the MCU ever. The soundtrack to the film went to more a 90s music soundtrack, which I still really enjoy. There's still some songs in there that I really enjoyed. This was just overall the most emotional film. I would say, actually, this is probably the most emotional film of the entire MCU, for sure. All of the just different themes they're going through in this film. I went to this film in the theater with 2 of my best friends. The 3 of us went to the theater, and there were so many points throughout the film where all 3 of us were crying either at the same time or at each of us at different times. I was crying honestly throughout, I would say, at least 90% of this film. like, I mean, all the scenes where we see Rocket being like all of him interacting with his friends, his animal friends, like Teefs and Nyla, yeah, Nyla, and a couple of others. I'm blanking on their names, but then you get to the point where the High Evolutionary and his helpers are just end up killing Nyla and all of Rocket's all their friends. Like, that just absolutely broke me. That entire scene, just I was crying all throughout that sequence and that scene. And of course, I mean, there are of course points in the film, scenes throughout the film where there's still a lot of the classic humor and comedy that James Gunn brings to the Guardians films. But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was truly ended up being a very satisfying conclusion to this version of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And of course, the film at the end teased that Peter Quill, Star-Lord, will return eventually. At this point, I'm guessing like he's going to be showing up in one of but maybe both of these Avengers films. But I don't really know exactly when. In actuality. But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I absolutely loved this film. This was such a great conclusion to the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. The Guardians of the Galaxy as a team, as a group, as characters. And then like Peter is now much different relationship towards Gamora, where they're very much like Gamora coming out off of Endgame. They like are they don't really know each other, definitely not on the same level as they used to. So the film then ends up having to figure out and show how their dynamic and how their relationship ends up building and rebuilding towards the end of the film, and Peter just having to let go of all of that and figuring it's time for me to go back to Earth, revisit my grandfather, which, by the way, I can't believe his grandfather is still alive. Like, I mean, how old is his grandfather now? Yeah, it was great. It was a really great conclusion. And now, like, the new Guardians team, Rocket's still leading the team, but it's now with Groot still, but then with Kraglin and some of the other characters. Coming in at number 7, and I mean, some of you might call me crazy for this, but for right now, it's number 7. I have Spider-Man: Brand New Day, the latest and best MCU Tom Holland Spider-Man film that we've gotten to this point. I mean, because this is truly the actual true, at its core, Spider-Man film in the MCU. Peter Parker, fully on his own, really trying to balance being Peter Parker and being anonymously Spider-Man, where no one knows that he is Spider-Man. And then getting to see his great interaction with Frank Castle, the Punisher, all throughout the film. I love John Bernthal and he's just always great as that character. You get to see Bruce Banner, the Hulk, show up again in this film, and it was really fun to see him, and especially get to see just like the true rage monster Hulk again, especially in the one sequence where towards the end of the film where Peter and the Punisher get to battle the Hulk while they're trying to stop Jean Grey. And speaking of Jean Grey, Sadie Sink as Jean Grey was just so great. I loved her performance as Jean Grey in the film, and the motivation behind her character. It was just absolutely fascinating. The way they showed her powers was absolutely fascinating to me. And like her motivation very much is the flip side to what Peter's having to deal with throughout the film. And then as it gets towards the climax and Peter having to try to really defeat and help Jean, they're able to end up bonding over them realizing that, yeah, they're both on their own in different ways, but due to that, they can also be there for one another and be each other's like best friend or confidant. So Spider-Man Brand New Day, it was such a just truly great, pure Spider-Man film, finally in the Tom Holland version in the MCU. Coming in at number 6 is the original Iron Man, the film that started the MCU as we know it. And what an absolutely epic beginning to the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we got. Robert Downey Jr., Kevin Feige, Jon Favreau, they all nailed bringing this character, this film to life. Robert Downey Jr. is, of course, iconic, phenomenal as Tony Stark and Iron Man. Jon Favreau directed the film, and he did an absolutely phenomenal job directing the film and really bringing that style and the way Tony, and of course the writing of how charismatically funny, but also in the beginning how just high-minded Tony is, and where he definitely has to be humbled a lot, and he does for sure as you get through the rest of the film. The villain of the film is like, it's cool, but it's kind of also like, it's whatever. It's kind of generic, but it's still cool. The final battle between them is kind of interesting. But at the core and at the end of the day, the story that Tony goes on in this film is just the classic hero's journey, where he literally goes into a cave and eventually becomes the hero by the end of the film. So yeah, the original Iron Man, the film that started off this whole cinematic universe, is just absolutely a just top tier MCU film. Coming in at number 5 is the first Avengers film. The Avengers, the film that truly proved you can pull off team up movies in live action on the big screen. Pulling in Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Black Widow, the Hulk, all together as one team, Hawkeye as well, as one team into one film and make it. And this is the genius of actually the original Avengers film, is that they went into it and realized the story that they can tell is just, they can be very simplistic, of Loki being the villain and then the Avengers having to team up, Nick Fury bringing them all together to battle him, defeat him, so the Earth isn't taken over. And it becomes the third act, just this classic third act of the Avengers battling Loki and all of the like just cannon fodder army all around New York City. The Avengers, it's just they pulled it off. They pulled off being able to do team up movies successfully on the big screen for the first time, and it was just as epic and as awesome as it should be. So it's just awesome that they truly succeeded to this degree. Coming in at number 4, I have the original Guardians of the Galaxy. This is my personal favorite of just like the original new superhero character franchises, the Kevin Feige bringing in to the MCU and the new heroes we'd be introduced to for the MCU moving forward. This is my favorite of those like teams, new characters being brought in. Guardians of the Galaxy, bringing James Gunn in to direct and write. I mean, his style, his sense of humor was just perfect for this film. The soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. The Guardians as characters, Peter Quill, Rocket, Gamora, Drax, Groot, are just all so iconic, so funny, so irreverent. I like it. The Guardians of the Galaxy, that first film, that was the first MCU film I watched just like at home after I had been introduced to the MCU from Avengers Age of Ultron. And yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy has always been one of my all-time favorite MCU films ever since I first saw it. This is just a great film. We truly get our first like full look and character of Thanos in the film. Of course, we get the tease of him and the post-credit scene of the Avengers movie, but we really get to see him for the first time as a character in this film in one sequence. And it really that helps to continue to build out the fact that Thanos is the big bad that we're building towards for Infinity War and Endgame. Yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is just, for me, such an absolutely phenomenal, fun comedy, action, superhero, origin story film. Coming in at number 3 for me is Captain America Civil War, or as many of us like to call it, Avengers 2.5, where we have our set of Avengers battling one each other, taking sides because of the Sokovia Accords. And this film also has one of the best just villains, because it's not just about the Accords that start to break the Avengers apart. It's also about Barrett Zemo, who is looking to truly crumble the Avengers from within. This is really the film that sets up why the events of Avengers Infinity War honestly take place. Captain America Civil War, you get Steve and Tony on two very different sides of what the Sokovia Accords represent for the Avengers and the team as a whole, and all the other Avengers characters taking each of those sides differently, and them ending up battling it out at the epic airport scene. It's just the original, just like smashing our heroes together, our toy heroes together kind of scene, which was so fun. We get our first introduction to Tom Holland as Peter Parker, Spider-Man, as well as Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, Black Panther. And at this film, and then of course, after that epic fight at the airport, we get the much more personal battle between Tony, Steve, and then Bucky, where they face off against Zemo at the end of the film, and Zemo reveals that Bucky was the one that killed Tony's parents. Of course, he was the Winter Soldier when that happened, and so it wasn't actually Bucky, but of course, Tony is completely blindsided by the fact that, and just full of rage by the fact that someone he knows and someone who's the best friend of the other, like, main captain of the team that he is a part of is the one that killed his parents, and especially like his father, but especially his mother. It then becomes like that's truly what breaks the Avengers apart. That revelation, and Tony battling Steve, and as well as Bucky, and then eventually Steve loses his shield. He gives it up to Tony. And the one line in this film that I always like, just emotionally, truly emotionally, like, resonate and fully encaptures this film for me, is when Tony is like in the middle of battling Steve and Bucky, and he says to Steve, "I don't care. He killed my mom." Like, it's just such a just truly personal, like, great story and just great idea. Now, of course, everyone to this day still debating Team Cap, Team Iron Man. Who was right? For me, I genuinely think Tony was right. I'm Team Iron Man. Who are you? Which team are you on? Comment down below. Let's have that conversation, have that battle down there. But yeah, Captain America Civil War, definitely, or Avengers 2.5, definitely to my third favorite MCU film. And now comes down to the final two films, and we all know what the two best MCU films are. Now, for me, coming in at number 2 is Avengers Infinity War. Avengers Infinity War was the beginning of the true culmination of 10 years of storytelling, 10 years of build-up, bringing all of the characters we've gotten introduced to all into one film to battle Thanos. And this is the film it's called Infinity War, to see who he's going to win that Infinity War, gaining all 6 Infinity Stones in that gauntlet. Obviously, we know Thanos ended up winning. Our heroes lost. Half of humanity, half of all life ceased to exist. And this film pulled all of those characters, all of those tones together so seamlessly, so perfectly that, I mean, for so many of us, Infinity War is our favorite MCU film. For me, of course, you'll see, I prefer Endgame. But Infinity War absolutely is an absolutely epic culmination at that point of bringing all of the characters together. I mean, the shock that we all went through in the theater of seeing, oh my God, Thanos won. He snapped his fingers. Half of all life ceased to exist. And the half of all our heroes are gone and dusted away. But I mean, yeah, Avengers Infinity War, I mean, like, I have such a awesome, great relationship to both Infinity War and Endgame. Also because both films came out during my birthday weekend. So I got to invite a ton of my friends and have like my family all come. We rented out at least like 2 or 3 of the whole rows in the theater for both films to watch both Infinity War and then Endgame the next year. And it was just my 2 favorite times celebrating my birthday and experiencing the 2 most epic, culturally impactful pop culture movie events that we've gotten this century. So, but yeah, Infinity War, absolutely. It's just an absolutely awesome film. But coming in at number 1 for me, absolutely, is Avengers Endgame, the other half to Infinity War, the true final culmination, conclusion to the Infinity Saga and a bunch of our original Avengers storylines, character arcs. And yeah, this was the final battle between all of the Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, all of the Wakandans and Black Panther, all of our heroes truly all together fighting Thanos and his army. And this was just such a fun, awesome film, being both of course, they had to do time travel, time loop movie, or time travel movie, for the main plot to go and regain all of the Infinity Stones eventually, to then to create their own gauntlet from Tony Stark's nanotechnology, to snap their own fingers, bring everybody back, and then eventually battle Thanos and his army one final time to defeat Thanos one final time and truly make sure he is dead and gone for good. And that last hour of Endgame is some of the most just actually truly satisfying and epic fan service event that we've literally ever gotten in cinematic history. The moment that Cap gets up and you hear Sam in his ear saying, "On your left," and all of the portals starting to open and all of the rest of the dusted heroes coming through. Literally every theater that opening weekend was just going bananas. Getting to see that, and then finally getting to hear Steve Rogers, Captain America, say, "Avengers Assemble," and just the euphoria of finally hearing that and seeing all of the heroes going and battling Thanos and defeating Thanos and his army was just so awesome. So yeah, Avengers Endgame, of course, is the best MCU film, best Marvel Cinematic Universe film. I mean, period. Like, I don't think we'll ever get a more epic high, a better film than this, and what this film represented ever in the MCU as the MCU continues. I really hope, and again, I really hope that Avengers Doomsday and then Secret Wars are really good and warrant their existence and everything, but we just have to see. But yeah, that is my ranking of all 38 MCU films from worst to best. What's your ranking? Comment them down below in the comment section. I know this was an epically long video, but of course it was going to be ranking this many films, tackling this franchise. But yeah, what's your ranking of the MCU films from worst to best, or however many films, how many TV shows you've seen? Rank them, rank them, and comment them down below, worst to best, what your rankings are. And I will see you guys tomorrow in the next video.